So we're going to try something now, which we've certainly not done before. We're going to have this session moderated remotely by Raluca from Carnegie Europe. So, Raluca, are you there? Could you say something, Raluca, so I know that it's working?
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me?
There we go. Yeah, we can. That's great. So, Raluca, thanks for doing this. I'll hand over to you now. But yeah, I just wanted to make sure that it was all working, which it appears to be. So thank you very much. Yeah, Raluca, over to you.
Thank you very much. And first of all, apologies to not be in the room. I would have loved to, but given some recent developments, it's safer for me to be online. But again, thank you very much for inviting me to moderate this fourth session of the 9th Annual European Cybersecurity Conference, which is titled Enhancing European and International Cooperation to Respond to Cyber Threats and Promote a Global, Stable, and Open cyberspace. My name is Raluca Cernatoni, and I'm a visiting scholar at Carnegie Europe. And on behalf of Carnegie Europe, I'm also a research expert on emerging disruptive technologies as part of the EU Cyber Direct and EU Cyber Direct Cyber Diplomacy Initiative project. I have the great pleasure of moderating this session in a hybrid format, so hopefully this will go well. The title of this session could not be timelier, I would say. Because given the ongoing war in Ukraine, international cooperation and joint action to promote peace, diplomatic tools, but also to enhance cybersecurity and cyber defense are, I would say, ever more necessary. The war challenges the effectiveness of the tools developed until now and even asks important questions, for instance, how international and European frameworks for responsible state behavior, but also capacity building in cyberspace apply in this situation. Much more reflection, I would say, is needed in terms of understanding the activity done by non-state actors acting as proxies, and in the case of the Ukrainian war, acting as proxies on both sides of the conflict. And this definitely raises some important dilemmas. So my hope during this session is to also address some of these key questions triggered by the current situation. So, for instance, what does the war in Ukraine tell us about the state of cybersecurity or cyber diplomacy, as well as cyber defense today? More importantly, what about thinking also through the effectiveness of peacetime diplomatic instruments, such as cyber confidence and trust building measures, and how these can be also translated in states of war or conflict? But what is certain, I would even more dare to say, is that no country can counter cyber threats alone. And cooperation and a multilateral approach are therefore crucial to mitigate cybersecurity threats and to ensure the stability of the digital world. So in the past decade, for sure, we have seen increased efforts from the side of the EU and NATO to undertake a number of initiatives aimed at strengthening cooperation among their member states, but also within other international organizations and partner countries. First and foremost, when it comes to what I would say engendering this shared understanding of the digital threat landscape, but also to promote international law, protect norms, human rights, and fundamental freedoms online. So for this session, the stated aim is to actually start to discuss the latest developments outlined in the EU's new cybersecurity strategy, also more recently in the published strategic compass, but also to deep dive into other non-regulatory instruments, for instance, to promote cooperation and knowledge sharing between EU member states, EU institutions, but also between the EU and NATO, within, again, international fora and with other key important partners, and not to forget as well with the industry. It is, I would say, one of the other aims of this session to also highlight the capacity and confidence building measures to date, but also how these can be improved in the long term. So having an eye towards the future and to implement a more coherent and holistic international cybersecurity approach in more pragmatic terms, but also to promote, as the title of this session states, a more global, stable, and open cyberspace, both at times of peace, but also in times of war. So to discuss these issues, we have today a distinguished lineup of speakers delivering their input in the running order of the program. First, I have the pleasure to introduce the two distinguished keynote speakers who will address us virtually via pre-recorded speeches. So I will first introduce Ms. Anne Neuberger, Deputy National Security Advisor on Cyber and Emerging Tech with the National Security Council and the White House, who will join us virtually now. And this is the cue for the tech team, I would say, to play the video.
Good morning. I regret that I am not able to join you in person this year, but appreciate the opportunity to address you virtually. We are at a geopolitical inflection point. At this time, we are witness to the largest land invasion in Europe since World War II. These circumstances are a sobering reminder that peace and global stability are fragile, and that diplomacy and international cooperation are in each of our national security interests to achieve a more peaceful, prosperous, and stable world. An important part of my responsibilities as the Deputy National Security Advisor for Cyber and Emerging Technologies is to consider the geopolitical dimensions of cybersecurity and technology broadly, and then to navigate their national security implications. Fundamentally, technology has made our lives better, but technology is also inextricably linked with questions of governance, corruption, and human rights. And technology is a tool leveraged in global competition, both in positive ways as well as negative ones. On the one hand, advancements in machine learning and big data analytics are revitalizing industries from public health and education to supply chain management. Digital tools are used by governments to improve the delivery of public services to their citizens. Many of these tools prove to be indispensable as our countries continue to navigate COVID-19 challenges. On the other hand, we recognize that technology can also be used by authoritarian regimes to advance mass surveillance, facilitate arbitrary detention, spread disinformation, and systematize oppression. And governments can also use malicious cyber activity as a component of force projection, as we've witnessed with Russia's further invasion of Ukraine. International cooperation is necessary to effectively plan for and advance solutions to our most pressing cyber and technology-related challenges, and doing so in a manner consistent with our principles and values. Upon accepting this invitation, I was asked to reflect on both on the role of cybersecurity and technology, and also what more international partners can do to defend against malicious cyber activity from hostile state and non-state actors. I'll now turn to my views on that important question. When defending against malicious cyber activity, we should always begin with the us and them paradigm. First, there is us. Governments and companies are under constant, sophisticated, and malicious attack from nation-state adversaries and criminals. And there is them, the nation-state adversaries and criminals, who look for any opening to attack, whether hunting for coding errors or compromising supply chains to create an attack vector. We are fully in control of what steps we take to defend against malicious cyber activity, and that work must begin at home. First, each of us must harden and modernize our domestic cyber defenses to make ourselves less vulnerable to malicious activity. In some places, each of our nations is a leader with respect to the sophistication and effectiveness of the authorities and processes we have in place. And in others, we are laggards. We must accelerate our efforts at home by looking to learn from one another's experiences, replicating what works and learning from what doesn't. The last 13 months has been a period of reflection in the United States, and we've taken aggressive measures to improve our cybersecurity posture with presidential directives, public-private partnerships, and changes in our laws. For each of the changes and innovations we've made, we first considered what measure our international partners had in place to solve shared challenges, and sought to learn from them. Second, we must clearly communicate what behavior is and is not acceptable in cyberspace. Clarifying what behavior is and isn't acceptable in cyberspace, communicating shared values, common interests, and reiterating norms can act as a force multiplier for holding malicious cyber actors accountable. International law and peacetime norms set the standard by which we judge responsible state behavior in cyberspace, and they signal the activities that the international community would find unacceptable, whether in conflict or peacetime. Third, we must demonstrate unity and work together to impose costs on malicious cyber actors. In the case of nation-states, we do so with public attribution. The international community must be prepared to work together to condemn and potentially respond to cyber activities that run contrary to our standards of responsible state behavior, lest they become the new norm. Publicly acknowledging and condemning malicious incidents and their destabilizing impact is an important step to reinforcing the framework of responsible state behavior in cyberspace. Many of our countries have worked together to jointly attribute malicious activity over the last year, and we look forward to continuing that partnership. The unity the international community has shown in rejecting Russia's further invasion of Ukraine has shown the power we have when we work together. We can and must do the same to impose costs on malicious cyber actors. Finally, we know nation-states aren't the only malicious cyber actors. International partners must also continue to cooperate through existing channels to work together to identify, disrupt, and prosecute malicious cybercriminals. In summary, international cooperation on cybersecurity and technology is necessary to promote a global, stable, and open cyberspace. And the United States stands ready to build on our existing European partnerships. I wish you a successful and productive meeting.
Thank you very much. This was for sure a great way to kickstart the discussions. But before going into it, I will now invite you to listen to the other pre-recorded speech by Mr. David Van Wel, Assistant Secretary General for Emerging Security Challenges at NATO. So cue the video once again.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. It's a pleasure to join you today, and apologies that it's virtual. This conference comes at an unprecedented time. We're in the midst of an ongoing, wholly unprovoked invasion of Ukraine by Russia. This battle is not only taking place in the physical world, but also in the digital world. Cyberspace was used to shape the Ukrainian environment with cyber attacks and disinformation. It's being used now to disrupt Ukrainian communications and the ability to communicate with the population. It will continue to underpin the entire war. Cyberspace is on at all times. It's a battleground of strategic competition, and it's a point of vulnerability for us all. And so it's important that we discuss ways to confront crisis and manage conflict in cyberspace. Protecting and promoting a free and secure cyberspace is not something any one nation, any one alliance, or any one continent can do alone. International cooperation and partnerships, including with the European Union, are vital to work that is happening now and must continue to promote a stable and open cyberspace. Today, I will discuss three areas with you. First, the evolution of our thinking about cyber defense at NATO and the current strategic landscape. Second, how allies are using NATO as a platform to facilitate consultation and coordinate action among themselves and with partners. And third, the role of cyberspace in a new strategic concept for NATO and beyond. Allies recognized cyber defense as part of NATO's core task of collective defense already in 2014. Originally, NATO viewed the cyber domain as primarily technical in nature. Now, cyber defense is a core and integrated part of NATO's broader deterrence and defense posture. Cyberspace is unique. There is constant competition and continuous ambiguity that renders traditional thoughts on deterrence and strategy less effective. It's not possible to prevent and deter all cyber activity, so we must shift our thinking towards a more proactive approach. Our efforts must keep pace not only with a dynamic cyber threat landscape, but also with rapid technological change. Our responses must consider this reality and the various state and non-state actors that complicate the threat environment. In particular, critical infrastructure, the very systems that we depend on to live and work and function as a society, have become a target to cybercriminals and nation-state actors. In 2022, so far, there have been malicious cyber activities targeting international health organizations, civilian transportation systems, military and diplomatic departments, global telecommunication outlets, and energy and oil suppliers. We are seeing a cross-section of these attacks also occurring in Ukraine. This form of competition blurs the lines between peace, crisis, and conflict. NATO has taken significant steps to respond to these challenges. 7 years after the adoption of NATO's last cyber defense policy, Allies heads of state and government endorsed our latest policy at the Brussels summit last year. Importantly, Allies recognize cyberspace for what it is, a unique domain that needs to be treated as such. For example, Allies acknowledge that the impact of significant malicious cumulative cyber activities might, in certain circumstances, be considered as amounting to an armed attack. The true strategic consequences of malicious cyber activities may lie not in producing a catastrophic armed attack that disables a country in a single moment. Rather, such consequences may be the result of an accumulation of smaller attacks to undermine the sources of national power. NATO must actively deter, defend against, and counter the full spectrum of cyber threats at all times. And if necessary, Allies will impose costs on those who harm them, and such responses are not limited to cyberspace. To put words into actions, Allies are making greater use of NATO as a platform for political consultations. Allies are sharing information and concerns, exchanging national approaches, as well as considering possible collective responses. To support these efforts, Allies continue to bolster their resilience in the face of potential cyber incidents targeting, especially now, in national critical infrastructure. They've been clear that they stand ready to respond to malicious cyber activities by using all of the tools in the toolbox, be it political, economic, diplomatic, or military. And with this in mind, NATO is also drawing on mutually beneficial partnerships, including with other countries, international organizations, industry, and academia. The European Union is one of our closest partners, and I mean this in a literal and figurative sense. NATO is engaging with the EU to look at our existing toolboxes for countering cyber threats. We continuously seek areas to complement the unique roles each organization has in cyber defense and amplify possible responses. NATO and the EU regularly share information between cyber incident response teams and exchange best practices, particularly so now given the events unfolding in Ukraine. We are enhancing consultations with Finland and Sweden, while continuing to work closely with partner nations such as Ukraine, Georgia, Japan, New Zealand, and Australia, among many others that are committed to a rule-based order in cyberspace. By using NATO as a platform, we can and do work together to enhance our situational awareness. This informs the development of comprehensive responses across political, military, and technical levels. Of course, unlike other operational domains where security concerns are primarily the responsibility of states, cyber defense is heavily influenced by the private sector. Often, the private sector is the first responder, operator, and innovator in cyberspace. So when formulating partnerships, it is vital to integrate industry as a core component. Information sharing, exercises, training and education are a few examples of areas where NATO and industry are working together to improve our ability to detect, prevent, and respond to cyber threats quickly. The current situation in Ukraine only highlights the importance of doing even more together. Looking ahead, technologies such as artificial intelligence, autonomous systems, big data, biotech, and quantum are changing the world and our everyday lives. They're also changing the way that the Alliance operates. They provide us with new opportunities for our militaries, helping them to become more effective, resilient, efficient, and sustainable. But they also represent new threats. As we embrace the vast opportunities provided by these new technologies, we must also prepare for the immense risks that can arise from their use. Peace in our continent has been shattered. There is war in Europe on a scale and of a type we thought belonged to history. We face a new reality for our security. And so, following a meeting of NATO defense ministers earlier this week, we will reset our collective defense and deterrence for the longer term. As part of this, we will consider the future of our cyber defenses. And a new strategic concept will be agreed upon by NATO leaders in Madrid this summer. This pivotal moment requires collective resolve towards our shared responsibility in securing the future of democracy, the future of our values and principles, and we will continue to work with our partners, including the European Union, to ensure that we are all better protected and more resilient. Thank you for your time today, and I wish you a fruitful discussion in the session to follow on these important topics.
Many thanks to all the keynote speakers for sharing their views. I think we have great food for thought to kickstart the panel discussions. So I took some notes and to flag some common takeaways. Both keynote speakers emphasized the importance of international cooperation against malicious cyber activities perpetrated by state and non-state actors. What was also emphasized was the accelerating impact of technological advancements on both the geopolitics, but also the cyberspace, as well as the key role of public-private partnerships, the need to protect critical infrastructure, and also to step up cooperation on norm promotion. And one other key dimension is the importance of advancing strategic thinking and situational awareness regarding the cyber threat landscape. But to discuss these issues, I have the great pleasure of introducing the panel and again, the excellent lineup of speakers joining us today, both in person, in the room, and online, and to deliver their input remarks in the order of the program. I have the great pleasure of introducing Mr. Viktor Staniecki, Head of Cyber Sector Security Policy Division at the European External Action Service, in the room with you. Ms. Natalie Jarsma, Ambassador at Large for Security Policy and Cyber with the Kingdom of the Netherlands, joining us online. Ms. Piret Urb, Head of International Relations Information System Authority in Estonia, as well as in the room. And last but definitely not the least, Mr. John Graham Cumming, Chief Technology Officer, Cloudflare, who is joining us online from San Francisco, if I'm not mistaken. Thank you very much. And of course, it is a pleasure to host the panel discussion today, and maybe to share some housekeeping rules. And with an eye on the clock, I would suggest that introductory remarks on your side would be kept to up to 5 to 6 minutes. I also highly encourage you to potentially dedicate 1 or 2 minutes in your remarks to react to the keynote speeches, because some points were raised there, as well as, depending on time, I will also take my freedom or liberty or privilege to abuse of my role as chair and follow up with some questions or points of clarification before moving to the next speaker. And finally, once the speakers are finished, I will move to a round of questions and also open the floor to the Q&A and for taking on audience questions. But without further ado, I now turn to you, Mr. Staniecki, in the room to share your thoughts potentially on these efforts in the context of recent cyber-related policy developments, maybe the role of the European External Action Service related to cyber diplomacy and capacity building mechanisms. But yes, I will leave it to you, and I will give you the real floor. Over to you, Mr. Stanley.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Raluca, and great to see you here close to me and all the colleagues in the virtual room. But first of all, as well, you're the audience. It feels really great to be back into real events and networking. I think that I'll try to be short in my introductory remarks and leave more time for interactive discussion and engagement with you, and as well with my co-panelists. I think that many important points have been made already by keynote speakers, by Anne and David. I would like to highlight in my intervention, introductory intervention, few elements. First of all, related to war in Ukraine, multilateral cooperation, including a program of action, and then a few words, say few words as well, EU cyber diplomacy toolbox. So first of all, I think that it has been mentioned by David and Anne, is that I think that a lot of things that we have taken for granted, including peace in Europe, are no longer true. And the unprovoked Russian military invasion in Ukraine has been preceded as well and accompanied by large-scale and persistent cyber attacks. Even if the cyber has not been on the first pages in comparison with conventional warfare, it still remains there, and it's important. And we strongly condemned and will continue condemning cyber attacks against the Ukrainian government, entities, and critical sectors, as well as citizens. The attacks are, of course, an integral part of the ongoing conflict and aggression against Ukrainians' independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity. So, in short, the cyber threat level continues to be very high, and as you know, per the nature of cyber attacks, they are very difficult to contain. So they may hit unintended targets and have spillover attacks. So we, as the European Union and our member states, and I think that Piret might be saying a little bit more about that, need to urgently prepare ourselves and for spillover effects and as well cyber attacks by enhancing our resilience and building broader coalition of different stakeholders to address those. We, as the European Union, of course, from the day zero, are engaged in providing short-term support to Ukraine, as well as assistance to countries in the region, such as Moldova, Republic of Moldova, Georgia, and in the Western Balkans. We're also, as per the title of today's session, we're very much working close hand in hand with our like-minded partners to ensure complementarity as well as of assistance, as well as avoiding unnecessary duplication. And also taking into account this new threat landscape and as a part of the recently adopted strategic compass that is being endorsed by the European Council as we speak now, will be engaging into reviewing our EU cyber defense policy framework, as well as further enhancing our cyber diplomacy toolbox in order to set our ambitions and policy for the implementation and key deliverables in the upcoming decade. So now let me turn into multilateral cooperation. I think it has been highlighted by Anne and David as well, is that even if the current developments are our focus is on current developments, it doesn't mean that that rules of international law and as well as important and strong enforcement measures are still crucial to be there in order to prevent conflicts and human suffering, including in cyberspace. I think that even if these are being broken at the moment, it doesn't mean that we have to stop or we should stop working on them. We should continue strengthening and promoting international law and rules-based order. So as On the cyber component of that, as most of you probably know, we will have a new session of the open-ended working group starting next week in New York. And I think that we'll use, as the European Union and our member states, the opportunity to speak out clearly and strongly on Russian behavior in cyberspace, in Ukraine and beyond Ukraine, and to denounce malicious cyber behavior under all the agenda items of the open-ended working group. Open-ended working group for us, from the perspective of the European Union, is a very important forum where all the states are represented that are working on elaborating on issues, cyber issues, in the context of international security. And it has a very important role and responsibility to promote and clarify the application of international law in the cyber context. And I think that, you know, there is already a sizable and very solid acquis that has been established by the previous work done in this area in the format of United Nations group of experts, UNGGE, and the previous session of the open-ended working group that highlighted the importance of norms of responsible state behavior, applicability of international law in cyberspace, and as well importance of confidence-building measures. And we'll continue to build on that acquis and take that even further. However, it's also, and I think that it's important to highlight, it's time to start calling out those who violate rules, norms, and principles of responsible state behavior that they have themselves agreed on. So we will also, I think, use this opportunity to underline the need for implementation and the role of stakeholders, a multi-stakeholder approach in that context. I also said, and I think it links very well with the multilateral discussions about the program of action that the European Union has been promoting since the previous session of the open-ended working group, and will continue to do so as well in this current context. The overarching objective of the program of action is to strengthen international security and stability in ICT domain by putting in place a permanent and inclusive institutional mechanism to support the strategic framework for responsible state behavior and to identify and contribute to addressing new challenges as they arise. So in our view, the program of action will provide in particular a permanent platform to help monitoring the implementation of the strategic framework. It will also be a venue to identify and contribute to addressing new challenges, and as well serve as a bottom-up mechanism to support implementation efforts at national level. And I think that this is especially through tailored and coordinated capacity building efforts that are absolutely crucial. And as well, last but not least, be a venue for engagement and cooperation with multi-stakeholder communities, so the private sector, academia, and civil society as appropriate and in relevant areas. Then let me close my intervention by mentioning a few elements on the EU cyber diplomacy toolbox. As you might know, I hope you know, this is a mechanism that has been agreed in 2017 by the European Union, by member states, that provides all the measures under the common foreign and security policy to be used in case of malicious cyber activities. And we have been very active since then in responding in a unison manner as the European Union to many of the cyber attacks and activities. We have issued over 11 public statements, and including one on attacks against Ukraine in January 2022. We have been actively working our diplomatic tools, such as diplomatic démarches, and as well we adopted cyber restrictive measures against 8 individuals and 4 entities and bodies. We have been working, of course, in that framework with our closest allies and like-minded partners, including NATO, Australia, UK, United States, Norway, Ukraine, and Georgia, to just mention a few of them. We have as well put in 2020 under the newly revised EU cybersecurity strategy a proposal to further enhance EU's ability to prevent and deter and respond to cyber attacks. So we are currently working on thinking what new measures we can put in our toolbox. David, I think, referred to as well NATO's upcoming new strategic concept and exchanges that we have with NATO international staff on comparing our toolboxes. And one of the areas on European Union side that we are looking into is, of course, further enhancing our EU intelligence cooperation, ensuring coordination between internal and external dimensions. And I think that Julie from DG Connect was speaking on that in the previous session. Further coordination with our partners, as well as cooperation with private sector. And I think that I went over time. So Raluca, over to you, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much also for keeping to time, I would say. I will again abuse of my role as the moderator and maybe follow up with some points of clarification, if you don't mind. And you mentioned the cyber diplomacy toolbox, but also the EU cyber defense policy. And I was wondering, how can they be further developed, or to be much to open a little bit the black box here, and maybe you would have some ideas to share and what to expect from the review of the cyber defense policy framework to indeed improve this cyber defense cooperation. And this is more my intellectual curiosity. You also flagged, for instance, the need for permanent and institutionalized mechanisms across the EU and within the EU. And maybe you can share some thoughts on this as well, in terms of potentially intelligence sharing and how this coordination can happen across institutions, but also between institutions and member states. So I will give again the floor to you.
Okay, thanks very much. Indeed, I think that, cyber defense policy has been one of the areas as well of the strategic compass that if you now document is accessible and you can read the whole entirety of that, but it contains a number of important references in the field of cybersecurity and cyber defense, including as well a call to launch a cyber defense policy review in 2022. So this year. It recognizes the strategic compass, recognizes the cyber domain as contested space and proposes to further develop our policy in order to enhance cyber defense capacities in collaborative way, stimulate innovation and build partnerships, including NATO. So at this stage, I can't go more into details what those different policy strands and reflections will entail, but these will give you a little bit of a flavor of what's going on and what's to come later this year. One of the aims is, of course, to boost development of cyber defense capabilities, and part of that, as integral part as well of chapters of the strategic compass, is to stimulate the EU's industrial base and further promote education, training and exercises to ensure that our cyber defenders are well equipped and properly equipped and ready to act. As well, there are elements on enhancing civil-military synergies. This is very much hand in hand of what our European Commission colleagues were already doing and are doing as a part of Strategy Compass parts. So we'll see what the final shape of that will be. And in terms of coordination, I think that this is almost a cross-cutting theme of many of those panels. And I think that I was hearing or listening to Ilias in the previous section, who was debating what is the most important. Is it a sort of framework for our personal contacts? And I think that, as always, the truth is probably somewhere in between. And I think that we have been again, this is something rather for my European Commission colleagues, but we have been working very closely to develop and engage in developing joint cyber unit part as one of the answers to your question for the need of a more structural approach in terms of coordination and exchanges.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm sure these points will come up later, potentially in the discussion if you have time. I'm keeping an eye on the time, and I'm now turning to Ambassador Jaarsma. So I would say, again, in terms of the hot war that is happening now, my impression is that cyber diplomacy kind of takes a back seat, and some of the takeaways and important dimensions of norms promotion and the frameworks already put in place under the UNGG and also OUWG. Victor already mentioned that are more considered, normative frameworks for responsible state behavior, but during peacetime. So maybe you can share your thoughts about this and, of course, how to maybe further develop this normative framework and taking into account the broader geopolitical landscape, but also the current crisis that is unfolding. So I will give you now the virtual floor, Ambassador.
Yeah, thank you, Raluca, and please call me Natalie. And thanks to the organizers for the invitation and the opportunity to participate virtually. I'm now calling from San Francisco, where I'm having conversations with the technical community in Silicon Valley. And it is these kind of engagements with the private sector and the NGOs that inspire me to think about how we can further step up the developments on cybersecurity within the EU. And this awful war that Russia started in Ukraine is obviously very much in everybody's minds and very much part of the conversation. And what strikes me is that the thinking and actions by many stakeholders in the cyber community has speeded up. I actually wanted to talk about the cybersecurity toolbox and building up on what Victor just explained. It is a unique example of how we can work together as a group of 27 member states to respond adequately to cyber attacks. And the international community has committed itself to the normative framework for cyberspace. Victor referred to it as the acquis. And this is a clear yardstick for responsible state behavior in cyberspace. The toolbox gives us guidance on acting together towards those who do not uphold these norms while respecting national competences. And most of the time we use the toolbox when countries do not act according to what we agreed to, international law and the norms. We then use the toolbox to exert pressure to change behavior. And as Victor said, we have applied various measures, including statements and sanctions. We have built up muscle memory on how to do this jointly as EU and often together with like-minded countries. These are, of course, tools that can be used by member states in their own foreign policy toolbox. However, an important role for the EU institutions is to enable EU member states to better implement forms of pressure and dialogue, and that is what we do together. In our view, one essential element on our escalation ladder benefits from a more pronounced elaboration in the toolbox, and that is dialogue. By engaging in dialogue with states where the malicious cyber behavior originates from, being coming from a state actor or from a cyber criminal, we make clear to the state that they have a due diligence obligation. And that is, of course, part of the normative framework. And we may signal better the possible consequences of continued malicious behavior. These measures may then include the existing tools of the toolbox. Entering into dialogue, or at least opening up the path to dialogue from the EU side, should be a standard first response of the EU and its member states when we see behavior outside the boundaries of the normative framework. If we can establish an agreed first response, depending on the nature of the unwanted behavior, we create predictability for what we may do next. And this also bolsters our deterrence. The war in Ukraine shows the clear need for expanding the toolbox with more effective and restrictive means to put pressure on other countries in order to change their behavior. This may be done by adding tools to the toolbox or by further strengthening existing restrictive measures, such as the cyber sanction regime. For the former, we can learn from the current crisis and reflect on what tools are still missing to be effective. For the latter, we need to consider the malicious cyber behavior and the diplomatic response, including sanctions in the broader context of the relationship with the malicious state. And currently, we only discuss cyber sanctions in the horizontal working party. But we believe we should discuss cyber sanctions in regular council working groups as well, in regional council working groups, I'm sorry. In this way, we can more effectively impose cyber sanctions while also mainstreaming cyber into the daily work of regional policy officers. Restrictive measures under the horizontal cyber sanction regime can only be directed at individuals or entities currently. This allows us to quite specifically target actors that act maliciously in cyberspace. However, the threats the European Union and its member states face in cyberspace also come from or are supported by states. In order to deter and respond to cyber attacks more effectively, the regime should also include the ability to direct sanctions at specific countries. The cyber sanction regime now freezes assets and restricts travel of individuals and entities to Europe. In order to be more effective, we need to do more than that. In line with other EU sanction regimes, the cyber sanction regime could also impose sanctions for entire sectors in countries. This should, of course, be explored with the regional working parties to impose proportionate measures to those sectors of a state that are most valuable to them. Let me also briefly come back to the normative framework. The cyber attacks on Ukraine and the possible spillover effects show once more the urgency of implementing the UN normative framework on responsible state behavior in cyberspace. And Anne talked about us and them. The normative framework is a solid framework, and we really should focus our effort on implementation. And part of the norms is, of course, about us and building up resilience. One initiative to take the ambition to implement the normative framework forward is the program of action. And Victor talked about it, so I won't go into details here. But a very important element of the program of action is capacity building. And we believe that close coordination with existing bodies of capacity building, such as the Global Forum on Cyber Expertise, is pivotal. In order to be most effective, we encourage all EU-related cyber capacity efforts to make use of the Global Forum on Cyber Expertise clearinghouse for capacity building. It works as a way to coordinate the assistance. The Global Forum on Cyber Expertise has been acting in line with the Busan principles for capacity building, and something that was also addressed in the 2021 Open-Ended Working Group report. Most European countries are member of the GFC, thereby they have a clearinghouse mechanism that ensures better coordination. In the end, what will most certainly ensure better coordination is that other EU member states join the Global Forum on Cyber Expertise. In that way, we can further streamline the implementation of the normative framework. Raluca, if you allow me, because you mentioned the current normative framework and the difference between peacetime and wartime, I think when we actually had discussions about that here as well, and I think when we that our like-minded view is that the normative framework is both for peacetime and wartime. And that is why we also wanted to include international humanitarian law, which of course applies only in times of war. And that is why it is also so important to follow the situation in Ukraine, also in terms of IHL related to the cyber world. Also related to the war, I wanted to express my deep concern about hacktivism, even though perhaps personally I feel a lot of sort of sympathy, enthusiasm for those who want to be on the good side of history. It is not helping states to actually abide by the rules for due diligence. We as the Netherlands have actually sent out communication to our broader community, but especially also to our hackers community, that hacking is illegal, and so hacking into foreign nations is also illegal, and that is really important for the due diligence obligation. That is, of course, part of the acquis, and it is really, we find it really important that we should uphold this framework. Thank you. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Natalie. Actually, you kind of preempted my follow-up question related to indeed some of the activities from non-state actors, but also sanctions and reactions, let's say, to the current conflicts or the reactionist approaches when it comes to some of the developments now. So maybe just given the time, I will move right over to our next speaker, Ms. Urb, and I would here maybe would like to ask you to share some views as well. You know, Estonia is at the forefront and has been at the forefront of dealing with cyber resilience, rapid responses, cybersecurity, and maybe you can share some conclusions, you know, lessons learned from your experience as well, in terms of improving the protection of core infrastructure elements and also reacting to cyber attacks. So I will now give the floor to you. It's can you
thank you.
Okay, perfect.
Yes,
yes,
thank you. Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. It's my great honor and pleasure to be here, and it's great to see everybody in person. And also congratulations to Victor and the team for all your great work, what you have been doing. And Natalie, also, I would like to express the support to many points what you just made, and I know that we are very much in the same line. So with many things the Netherlands is also doing, and the like-minded countries, and we are trying our best in these really crazy conditions. There are no words to explain or to express all that, and our government members have also been quite visible, so I'm not gonna repeat here all the things what Estonia has been saying or doing in these situations. And as I'm from the Cybersecurity Agency, I'm from Information System Authority of Estonia. We are like cybersecurity center basically by substance, and the one and only national cert in Estonia. So I'm gonna make some quite practical points as well. So there was a point from this morning from one of the panels where someone emphasized the necessity to increase the number of the IT guys in the companies. I know that here are many tech leaders from the industry as well, and what we have been lately struggling is the issue to make the managers, the management boards of the companies to understand that the cybersecurity, the IT security of the companies is not depending on the IT guys. Actually, it depends on the budget allocations, and they are the ones who have to understand it actually. And our Estonia CERT has been working since 2006, so we have quite some experience with working with the private sector, and everything has been built up in public-private partnership. So it's always difficult for the management boards to allocate the money to the places where they can't see it. But over the last years, there has been like a good change somehow. We see that it starts moving actually, and especially now, unfortunately now, but given of the situations over last months, everybody understands more and more that that also if they outsource the IT service for the companies, they have to be smart demanders. So they really have to know what to order, what they need. It's their responsibility. It's not the responsibility only of the IT guys. And so this is what we are doing a lot from the side of the government, all time. And this point actually brings me to my next point, which is a bit wider. So we all know that there's green transition or transition to green and sustainable all over the world. All the companies are participating, all the governments, all the countries. But what about the transition to resilient cybersecurity? So it should be exactly on the same lines with the green transition all over the world. And I guess now we understand it even more. So we all have to take it up as this green transition in the parallel level and to do the things to really get better and better in this field as well. So and the point what I also wanted to make, what was also reflected there before in the keynote speeches. At the moment, there's no agreement that how much resources really should be allocated to the cybersecurity. So what would be the sufficient? I'm not gonna make a certain parallel here, really. What you can think that, but at the same time, I guess in the world we are really in the point that the government should think that what is the percentage of I don't know, of the budget, GDP, what would make the difference? What would be how they would be able to keep the country's IT systems really safe and secure. And the same for the companies. Are the companies thinking and discussing that what would be the percentage of, I don't know, of the profit or of something else, how to keep their systems safe and secure? So what would be the methodology behind it? When we are going to get there, this is maybe something to start discussing much more. So how could we measure it? What would be enough? So these are the things to be tackled very, very soon, I guess. And of course, again, really great thanks to Brussels, to different teams in Brussels who have been doing a great job over last years. There is NIS2, Joint Cyber Unit, Competence Center, all very, very necessary tools to improve our cybersecurity, but as you said, and as also Natalie said, it's always the implementation that remains the key. And Commission has funded. There's a very, very good point also that I would like to bring, that Commission has funded Malicious program, which really helps to improve and harmonize the technical capabilities that our incident response teams possess. And this is very, very useful step to appreciate. This is something what can help us all to do the best in a really crisis situations. And regarding the cyber diplomacy toolbox, the cyber threat landscape shows us that state-sponsored attacks are not going to disappear in the future, unfortunately. And this is also why we need to enshrine the cyber sanctions regime into the permanent regime. So, and not to assess its relevance every year. So we would like to go a bit further there. And also regarding the capacity building, there is a project what we are conducting since 2019, which is the EU project called EU Cybernet. Started 2019. We have been building it up like nearly 2.5 years for now. And there's a strength which is in skills. So there are 43 skills, all the skill set. Would it be like malware detection, data protection, anything? Just name it. Very, very detailed skills, and there are over 200 experts already who are ready to share and to teach and to share best practices and to be available to make capacity building. So this is 3w.eu-cybernet.eu, which is funded by the Foreign Policy Instrument, which is a Commission's project. So I'm going to stop here. Very happy to take any questions from the floor or from the moderator. So thanks.
Thank you very much, Ms. Piret, for sharing with us some of the practicalities and also some of the recent developments when it comes to capacity building. And one thing that you flagged in your presentation is indeed the importance of public-private cooperation. And this was a point that also Mr. David Van Vel has emphasized in his speech in terms of the essential role that the private sector plays as the first responder, and also sometimes the innovator in cyberspace. So I will turn now to Mr. Cumming to share some thoughts from the industry side, especially in terms of, again, the practicalities of how to deal with crisis situations. So yes, I will give the virtual floor to you now, John. Please go ahead.
Thanks very much, Raluca. It's fascinating to to listen to the different approaches here, and the thinking is there seems like there's a lot of common agreement on what needs to be done. I very strongly agree with Piret about the need to act quickly and to really invest in cybersecurity. I work for a cybersecurity company, and what we see is that cybersecurity attacks continue all the time, day and night, across the world. And the reason they do is somewhat simple, really, which is that government and business have all moved to use the internet. And when you ask a question about how much budget should a company spend on cyber defense, that's a hard question to answer. But the flip side of it is to think about what would happen if your information systems don't work. And you'll quite quickly realize that they are the lifeblood of the organization. In a sense, IT is not a separate function which is operating on the side. It is the very essence of how a lot of businesses operate. And so it's really not surprising that cyber attacks, criminals and governments have gone online to make money or meet their strategic aims. What we see prior to the current conflict and prior to COVID is that, quite surprisingly, I think to most people, a very wide range of businesses, organizations, and government departments get attacked. And what happens is they're getting attacked by a range of actors. It's quite easy to concentrate on the sort of movie plot, government state-sponsored hacking, which people concentrate on, but and the reality is you see a wide variety of actors. And for example, over the last couple of days, there's been an announcement of a compromise of a US company called Okta, and it appears to be masterminded by a 16-year-old boy in the UK. This sort of thing is not uncommon. But over the last 2 years, I think we've seen two real accelerants in the need to shore up cybersecurity. So one thing that COVID did was it moved people away from offices, and for a while there had been a desire to protect the office or corporate environment as if we were protecting a medieval castle. And those walls have really disappeared. They haven't been overrun, they just don't exist anymore because people are moving around. They're working from different locations. And Raluca, you almost inadvertently made a point by saying that I was speaking to you from San Francisco. I'm actually in Lisbon, but it doesn't really matter where I am because I can operate and be part of this conference. And equally, it doesn't matter where attackers are or where employees are. So I think the US government has made this point around this idea of zero trust environments, the zero trust approach, which allows people to be wherever they need to be and protects infrastructure. The Ukraine war in some ways has been a wake-up call but not perhaps in the way we thought it was. I think there was a sense that in parallel with the kinetic war, there was going to be large-scale cyber attacks against countries that were not directly involved in the war. That hasn't, to the most part, happened. I think partly because the states involved are trying to keep things within the region and within the actual countries that are taking part in the war, but also because what's happening is that the real cyber attacks we're seeing, and we are seeing a real increase in cyber attacks across Russia, across Ukraine, and actually across the world, are by and large happening because of patriotic, what I would call patriotic hackers who are supporting a particular aim. And I think Natalie really made this point with the Netherlands, with saying, look, please don't do this. But we're seeing a vast increase. And what that really does is it says to any organization around the world that the things that we've been saying around needing to have shields up, needing to protect networks, needing to protect workers, needing to protect endpoints are all very, very real. They were already real pre-COVID. COVID removed those castle walls, and then along came the war, which has really just increased activity. And when you get increased activity, you get increased attacks, just because more people are looking for faults in systems, and they will find their way in, whether you are part of the actual attack, the actual war or not. The other thing I would say about private-public partnerships, this is very, very important. Governments have an enormously important role to play in terms of educating and working with the private sector, and also because critical infrastructure really isn't limited to governments. If you look at the Colonial Pipeline hack, Colonial Pipeline is private, but has a real-world impact at an infrastructure level. And as much as everybody gets attacked, critical infrastructure is, by its very nature, critical. One of the reasons why we put together a critical infrastructure protection program with CrowdStrike and Ping Identity was to help protect those organizations. So what I would say is public-private collaboration is vitally important. We need to do it. In private industry, we're often the ones who get attacked first or visibly, and often are responding very visibly. We do have a lot we can bring to the table. We cannot do it alone. And I would say that now, be it because of COVID, be it because of the war in Ukraine, or be it because of a general trend, which is to connect everything to the internet and use it, it is time to protect organizations, protect individuals in the cyber domain, because there is a really large amount of activity that has happened in the last 2 years and certainly in the last 3 weeks.
Thank you very much, John, for sharing these views. I will not follow up with a question and abuse of my role as a moderator, because time is now of the essence and we are running a bit short. So I would propose that, because we started late, we extend with a couple of minutes the session. So thank you again very much to all the speakers to sharing their thoughts with us. And I will now open the floor for some questions from the audience. So my colleagues in the room might help me to take one or two questions, and I will highly encourage you to keep to 1 minute in asking your questions, and then I will turn again to the speakers in the order of their remarks to give some answers and also some final comments. I see there are none so far, so maybe I will start not at the moment. Okay, perfect. So then maybe I will ask the question, and this will be a question to all the speakers. I think that one key concern, based on all the conversations that we had until now, is also to develop this capacity of foresight, and this is linked to, again, resilience building, capacity building across the public and private sectors. But we also heard from you and also the keynote speakers that we need to develop some cross-sectoral approaches and thinking across cyber, digital, critical emerging technologies, how the funding is going in this regard. I think Biret emphasized this element. How are the current initiatives working towards, building this comprehensive thinking? So my question to all of you would be how to connect all the dots, basically, that we have, and not only be, let's say, reactive when faced to cyber attacks, malicious cyber attacks, and having this foresight or future planning. What what works, what doesn't, and how to work better, for instance, and how to link thinking, strategic thinking, cyber-related thinking, geopolitical thinking in a more comprehensive way. So yes, I will then turn again to Victor and in the room to again share his thoughts and some final remarks. I would kindly ask you to keep to 1 to 2 minutes. I know it's challenging. So yes, Victor, you have the floor. I think we cannot hear you, Victor, or at least here virtually we do not hear you, but okay.
Many of the real-life events demonstrate to us how difficult and complex those issues are. We sometimes, and I think that it struck me in discussions with one of the companies that are working on the ground actually in Ukraine recently, how, you know, very often we think about high-level, high-tech scenarios, whereas sometimes it's a question if the person can actually get with a canister to the energy generator and power up, you know, energy that is needed to bring some devices online. And I think that, you know, it demonstrates that when we think about our resilience, we need to really approach that from the perspective of cross-domain cutting issue. We need to think about energy. We need to think, of course, about, you know, cyber resilience, but about trade, you know, dependence on supply chains, resilience of supply chains. So I think that it has to be my one plea will be that we need to bring different teams together, not work in the silos, and really have a very outside of the box and cross-cutting approach to many of those issues when we talk about cyber.
Great, thank you very much, Victor, for being first of all short, but also to the point. And now I will turn to Natalie.
Yeah, thank you. I think with the current war, we can learn from it that in times of war, cyber is a supporting element for the country that actually invades. But of course, if the goal is to destroy, then missiles and tanks are much more effective. Where we see that cyber is effective for a malicious actor to reach certain goals is in this gray zone. And that is what we have been discussing, of course, for a long time in the international community. Like, what can we do in the gray zone to deter and to make sure that that things don't get out of hand? And I think David made a very good comment that now NATO has decided that accumulation of cyber attacks can actually lead to a trigger of Article 5. It could be an armed it could lead to armed conflict. So creating clarity on what is not acceptable behavior is still, I think, very much part of that strategic thinking that we should be doing. Information sharing is also pivotal, I would say. I mean, EU, NATO information sharing, intel sharing was mentioned, but I mean, here I'm in the Bay Area in San Francisco, and I noticed that a lot of the big tech companies, they do compete with one another, of course, but they share threat info, and it's only by creating and expanding that that community and building the right bridges between the private entities, NGOs, and states that we connect together. And that is really challenging. I mean, I don't have the solutions on how to structure that, but it is definitely something that should be high on our agenda to think more strategically.
Thank you very much, Natalie. And this is an excellent point as well. Victor raised the cross-cutting issues, but then also the dimension of the gray area, and not only to think in peace, either war type of situation, but also the hybrid situations, and be prepared for these types of scenarios, and especially to work with the with other stakeholders, including the private sector and also civil society and academia. I will turn now to Piret to share her thoughts on this. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you again. And again, I very much agree with the previous speakers. And it's not easy. It's quite challenging to work with everybody, to work with the community, and to build up the trust. But us as a government and the cybersecurity agency, we are continuously doing it, and we see that it really helps. For example, last year we really made public the big cases what happened to the government, the really kind of bad cybersecurity related cases. So this is also part of building up the trust, that we talk about the things and we explain why it happened, how it happened. And of course, there are always the lessons to take. And we work with the community, which means that we are conducting the trainings and exercises to the community. We put together different sectors and we figure out the good scenario. We bring everybody together, being the government. So because we know that all of us, we are the same country. There's not like us and them. We all together. So this is the only solution we see. So thanks.
Thank you very much, Piret, for this. And it strikes me that not technological solutions or advancements in technology are the key issue here, especially when it comes to intelligence sharing, but trust. And I hear this word repeated, and the same can be said again in cultivating trust between public and private actors. And John, I turn to you now to give your final remarks and react to some of the points.
I do think what Piret has just said about trust is enormously important in cybersecurity, and in fact, learning from others is enormously important. And the only way you learn from others is if they tell you what happened to them and how they reacted to it. And I think that's enormously important for companies and for governments. You asked a question about foresight. I actually want to make an appeal for hindsight, which is that if you look at most cyber attacks that are successful, the defense against them was well known. They're not novel in general, and they're not shocking to practitioners. They may be shocking to the people who are victims. And I think one way to think about this is for regulators to come together and agree on some basic level of cybersecurity that we should all adhere to. Because many things, if you're an industry practitioner, that we've been saying for years and years are not yet implemented by many, many companies. Things that are, to us, seem simple. And so I think that level of cybersecurity would make a big difference. So my appeal is to have a bit of hindsight and to look back and say that could easily happen again.
Excellent. Yes, learning from the past and preparing for the future. That's a nice way to kind of round up the conversation. Again, thank you very much to the speakers for their excellent input. It has been a privilege and a pleasure to moderate this session. We are a bit over time, so this is all on me. But now I will pass the floor to Mr. James Wilmot from Forum Europe to close the conference. And again, thank you very much for being with me online and offline.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Raluca. Yeah, thanks, Raluca, for your excellent moderation, remote moderation at that. I thought it worked brilliantly. And thank you to the speakers from this session across the entire day. And as I said this morning, we don't take for granted the time that you put into preparing for your intervention, so very much appreciated. So that brings us to the end of this year's conference. To all of our sponsors, Accenture, Broadcom, BSA, the Software Alliance, Cloudflare, who, if you haven't seen, by the way, have some great swag, including socks and T-shirts available in the lobby, Norton, Life Rock, Sectra, Usercentrics, Vodafone, and Trudexia. So thank you for your support and the socks and the T-shirts. And to you in the room and to the 300 or so that have stuck with us attending online, thank you for being with us. We're beyond delighted that we've been able to share this substantial in-person experience with you. after such a long time. And I know for some people it's one of the first things that they've been to in quite a while, so thank you. We'll very soon be sharing the replays from today's sessions, along with any other documentation and outcomes from today's discussions, and those will all be with you very soon. So with that, thanks again. I'll close today's event and wish you a great rest of the day, and if you are in Brussels, a trouble-free journey home. So thank you very much.